Hello, we are back. I believe this is episode 60 of Fanatical Fridays. Mickey, as we're recording this, we're kind of coming off our break. I know we're a week in, but how was your extended holiday vacation?
Well, I wouldn't call it a vacation. Um, I take time off and I take vacations, and those are two different things. Holidays, there's a lot of work that goes into preparing for it, a lot of work that goes into cleaning it up.
Yeah,
Enough that I'm not going to call it a vacation, especially when you have multiple kids celebrating the holidays, family events.
yeah,
Um, so for me, it was time off
yeah.
of work. It was not all that relaxing. I mean, it's a slower
Uh,
pace.
yeah,
Um, I always say my favorite week of the year from a work standpoint is that week between Christmas and New Year's, um, because you get it's not full days of work,
hmm,
not calls all day with clients. Um, I've already done most of my planning, especially this year. Probably done more planning for 2023 well before the holiday period this year than I've done in the past. But there's still some nuanced components to the planning, and it's preparing to execute on the plan. And I like to plan, and I like to know how we're going to execute, and getting that together is really refreshing to me and
yeah,
invigorating. And so, from that perspective, I love that week,
yeah,
so that when you come back, you're ready to go. And it's really not just coming back from a standard vacation or standard time off. You're coming back to start anew. Like there's a new thing happening, and
hmm,
it's a little different when you're in higher ed because higher ed's anew is in the fall. But for us, we still consider January to be our new period, and so I'm ready to go into that um, with a great level of excitement. So
yeah,
that's always fun for me.
yeah. That's awesome. Well, as somebody who doesn't need to host others, it's a vacation for me, and I enjoy it. Good time
Do
to,
enjoy it because at
eh,
some point it'll probably not be that way for
yeah,
you.
exactly.
And the point it becomes not that way for you is
Right.
generally the start of about an 18-year period
Yeah.
or longer where it won't be that way for you. So
Yeah.
so enjoy it as much as you can.
Yeah, I will. And I am. I think one of the things, I mean, just thinking about the holiday break, no matter, what you celebrate, if you're getting gifts, I think one of
Mhm.
the more popular gifts, um, which for those of you on the video podcast, I can flex my little VR
I should have
headset
brought
here.
mine into the office. I should have brought mine into the office. And I say mine; they're not mine. They're my youngest as a pair.
Yeah. Yeah. I got mine a little while ago, and then a bunch of my friends got it they tried it out. So I got one. I actually tried my friends. I was like, this is
Hmm.
awesome. I tried it out, had to get one. Um, and then a bunch of my friends tried it out. And then I think they put it all on their Christmas list. They're like, I don't want anything else. Mom and dad, give me this one thing. Um, and so it's becoming a super popular, the VR headset obviously is becoming a super popular gift, just kind of like system, whether you use it for professional gaming, I think is, obviously probably the most popular use of it right now. But there's so many potentials for how we could use these headsets and the immersive nature of them and how it's just so unique and different than what people are used to in both the professional and meeting space community and the gaming community. And so I think it might be worth some of our time today chatting a little bit more about how people can use these VR headsets, for scalability in higher ed and incorporating more people into a more interactive community built environment. Um, and so I think, starting there, thinking about what you need to get rolling with VR, because I know some people probably hear VR, AR, all of those things, and just think that's 2050. I'm not worried about that right now. But unfortunately, it is here, and you have to be ready for it. So, um, I think one of the things when I was doing a little research into what it takes to get started with VR, it was actually a little easier than I thought it was. Meaning it's certainly sophisticated, but it's not a 1 year build out process. I was looking up. So one of the things that a lot of people are using is Matterport, which is this tool that allows you to basically capture three-dimensional images of rooms, of, outdoor spaces, all these other things. And I think they've been using it a lot in the real estate industry for a while, and allowing, I'm sure everybody's done the thing where you kind of click to the circle and view a room, and then you
Yep.
click to another circle, and you're walking around and seeing what the house kind of actually looks like. But doing that in the VR space is much different, where it's not still images kind of pieced together, where you're just kind of like seeing one thing then the next, and doing a little bit of that. It's full on 360, turn your head, can kind of see every component of an
Mm-hmm.
area and kind of walk through that virtual space. And then really using, that to enable things like, campus tours are probably the most obvious one. Some schools are already kind of out there doing that, and that's, way cooler than some of the virtual maps that you see and things like that. But there's so much more that you could do with it. And, I was looking into a few other schools and what they're doing. And there are a lot of apps kind of already pre-built that give you some really cool insight into the actual career field of, X, Y, and Z jobs. So there's
Yes.
schools, NASA has their own app, and it allows you to see, I mean, wild stuff, and actually look at people building things like rockets and engines and all these other things, where, if that's your career field, you're there in the room with them, looking around at, all the people helping support this project, and could dig in a little bit more. You can, in the arts and sciences, I think YouTube VR launched, somewhat recently, and it really puts you kind of like in an atmosphere that can be a professional setting where people are doing their job, and you're kind of just shadowing them without actually having to be there, which gives you, I mean, a wild exposure to tons of opportunities, which seems incredibly cool. So I'll kind of pause my rant here on like getting you up and running, but curious, as you think about, VR, maybe from, let's take some baby steps first and then branch into, even cooler things. What do you think schools could do to get set up on VR and kind of, and use it in a way that is beyond maybe just the campus tour, which is a little bit more, basic level VR at this point?
So I have several thoughts. So I think the campus tours, I think the basic idea, but probably one of the most intensive efforts, because you got to think, if your campus is a building, that's one thing. But if your campus spans acres and
Right.
acres, and you've got 20 different buildings that are 5 to 10 stories, that's, obviously you're not going to put everything on there, but that takes a little bit more time to do. Not necessarily the technology, but the time to get all of that mapped out is there. I think really, I don't want to say basic idea, but I think the other area, academically, there are a lot of different types of courses that could use this natively in the work they do, especially if you think about online courses that we've been more hesitant to offer online because of the hands-on component.
Yeah.
And putting that into a VR, it could be some healthcare, like nursing types of courses, could be some engineering types of courses, those that allow you to immerse yourself more into a 3D space versus a 2D space. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. The thing that I get a little concerned about it from a campus tour or even this type of idea is, what's the likelihood that your students or prospective students already have the equipment, especially from the campus tour piece, because if it's in a curriculum, that might be instead of a textbook,
Right.
you're getting these goggles, right? For prospective students, if you're spending a lot of effort there and you are a very high first gen student attraction, so you bring in a lot of your students, first generation students, that's still really, what's the likelihood that those students have access to it? And you want to balance that out. For me, I don't want to see it as your new primary channel. I think it's a new channel for an experience that you offer. So you've got virtual reality, you might have Zoom, you may have on campus, you might have fully remote and asynchronous. Like, you've got all these different channels through which you're engaging, whether it's a student or a prospective student. And I look at it as that type of component. I had this thought and opinion 15 years ago, as I would listen to colleagues on my campus. Well, this is when I was still a practitioner. Colleagues on my campus, colleagues on different college campuses that worked at other institutions, talking about the hesitancy for online. And while I understood that, I had the belief then that even every traditional program should offer, or should not offer, should require all of their students to take at least one online course. Because back then I felt like, and boy, I'm saying this making me sound like I'm a genius. But I did believe back then that we would all work this way more regularly, not necessarily that we'd have a pandemic and we'd be exclusively remote, but I felt like there were more interactions and work that would take place this way. And so I thought requiring that of undergraduates is just a part of the career preparation of how do you learn, how do you interact, and how do you engage this way. Mm-hmm. And I bring that up now to say, I would say in the next 5 years, it's pretty important that you think about how do we use VR to prepare our students for what's in the future. I think that just behooves you. And I think adding that in and adding that to the mix is important because it is a step further from this dynamic of virtual communication, of being online. It's another dynamic and it changes.
Yeah.
And it changes, but it also creates more opportunity to do things differently. And if you try to say, oh, we got virtual reality now, we're just going to do it the same as we did online with Zoom or whatever. No, it's not the same. It's the same as getting a CRM and having manual processes still in place.
Yeah.
No, you don't do that. So I think now's the time to start thinking about it and dabbling. Is that the right word? But getting into it a little bit, tiptoeing in and expanding. I think if you go in that route, other ideas to use, I like the idea of using it as an engagement and relationship building tool for those who are not with you. So can you also offer one-to-one meetings through that versus being in Zoom? It's different. It will make you stand out.
Yeah.
Doesn't require the same level of the Matterport and all that. I mean, it's got a little bit maybe because you might want to get someone's office in there so you get a sense of it. But I think that gives you a whole different dimension to connect and engage with someone. And I think then I might even expand it to say, okay, what can we do for building community? And the easiest way is virtual reality group, like a little group of students of their own little mini community. But aside from that, could we offer some type of VR based orientation versus online orientation? What if it is VR based? That's not dramatically far away from a campus tour,
right?
And just an online option for an orientation. It's not that, and I think that might give students the ability to kind of move around and connect and build community in their own way and in a different way. But those are the kinds of areas where I'd like to see schools test out. I would love to have an opportunity to kind of work with the school to test this out. How do we build this out? How do we replicate? Because I do believe, I know one of the things I hear from schools is when we did this online, we lose an element to our orientation if we try to do it online. I'm not suggesting virtuality is going to get you the fully in-person ability back or that experience back, but you can get closer to that with that than you can with this. And so I think that is just one area, excuse me, where I'd like to see folks kind of push the limits a little bit, where you can start to see start to test and identify and define for yourselves, how do we replicate this online experience or this in person or on campus experience online. You can get closer now with virtual reality than you could with Zoom or whatever tool you're using. And so that's really where I'd like to see schools test.
Yeah. And I think one of the things too is just thinking about the prospective student being able to potentially go to some type of orientation or something. Let's say it's their first time on campus and they don't know anybody. Going anywhere by yourself that you've never been before can be pretty intimidating, especially when you're, 17, 18, 19 years old, where if you're going with 3 of your friends, it's a little bit more of like, all right, cool. Like we're all going to have fun together. Like, what are we worried about? And so I think being able to do that type of orientation where you're trying to build community, you're having people almost bucket themselves into interests and then being able to split them up. They're building friends. And then when they show up on campus the first day, they already feel like, oh, where's, Jim and Sally? I was chatting with them in the group. Like, I want to meet up with them in person. This is super cool. Like you're kind of building this buy-in to your university that's just built on these these people building friendships in that space prior to, for some people, it's also tough. Even if we get there, it's like, oh, I don't know. Okay, we're in this room. We kind of have to do this game where we get to know each other, and you're a pretty shy person. And it's hard to kind of interact with people. Whereas some people may have that comfort of being in their own home, having kind of their VR headset on. It's like almost like a little mask you're wearing. And then you kind of meet these people and then can take off the mask when you get there. And then it really, blossoms into a good friendship where you're feeling much more confident and comfortable, at the university.
And I agree. Like, if I don't know, I'm in Pennsylvania, but let's say my new students are in Missouri or elsewhere, they can't all just get to campus for orientation. We want them to participate in orientation. Imagine if you offered that to students who live beyond a certain area, especially if you're a small private school. They're not going to be able to do that. I mean, I remember, gosh, many, many years ago when I was an undergraduate student, like, we had maybe 5,000 new students enroll in a given year, and maybe 40% of them came through orientation, at least in the summer.
Yeah.
I worked in that office as a student. And so, they didn't get an orientation, or they might have got some type of abbreviated thing that, the first couple of days of this right before the semester starts, but that was a separate orientation in and of itself. You couldn't do a summer and a fall orientation at one. And so there are things that you're missing, relationships you aren't able to build. And, this allows you to let everyone participate if they have the equipment. Let's be sure we're pointing that out.
Right.
But I think that's just, really, it's a new way, again, to begin to engage those students and to begin to provide an experience much, much deeper than this one.
Right. Yeah. So let's maybe move a little bit beyond the student recruitment realm for a second and maybe talk more about the value of VR in the classroom. And I don't know if you have any specific examples lined up, but one of the ones, it's funny, I was actually just chatting with the University of San Diego, their School of Nursing, and they have a whole VR component built into some of their courses to, experience real world situations and, doing injections and all these other things that, you can practice on a dummy as much as you want. It's just a little different. You've done it 3 times. You're kind of just used to it and you're going through the motions. Whereas in a VR atmosphere where it's, you have what looks to be a real patient and they're kind of moving and acting like a patient. And then you kind of need to go through a variety of situations because people are so different, and calming somebody down or kind of like, dealing with a kid versus dealing with, an elderly person is wildly different. And how are you going to handle those situations? And being able to react in real time and kind of go through the motions like that, I think gives you exposure into one, not only the career field, but like, okay, am I excited about this? Is this fun for me? Like, do I enjoy this type of work? You're getting real experience rather than in the classroom. Sometimes it might feel like, yeah, I love this. And then you actually do it and it might not be everything you thought it was going to be. And, that's disappointing for everybody, obviously. And so I think what's cool about that is it's valuable for the student, but it's so easy to then also turn that right back around to the prospective student and be like, you want to be a nurse? Like, come try this headset on. They come to campus, try this headset on and do this thing. Right. And it's like, you can use it in so many different ways and really getting, your bang for your buck and what you invested in. But curious, what else you think in the classroom that could be helpful for both students and prospective students, just students, faculty, anybody, some examples you've thought through.
So I think I'm going to two-year institutions. Two-year institutions have some very specialized trade programs around specific automation machinery, production machinery, those types of things.
Yeah.
Those programs are always limited in the number of students that they can enroll because of the space in that lab and the availability of some of those machines. I wonder what we can do. Now, you can't replicate all of that, but I wonder what you can do with it to spread out the learning so that some learning, if it doesn't have to be your hand touching the machine, but seeing how it functions, how much you might be able to add to that. I don't know enough about those machinery programs, the curriculum in there, and mechanical engineering. Those I hesitate to act like I'm to talk too in depth to make it seem like I know what I'm doing when I don't. I don't know if you know much about the Dunning-Kruger effect. You how the less you know, the more confident you may be.
Yeah.
Same thing. But I wonder where you can find opportunities to increase some program size there. I also like you mentioned nursing. I think that's a good one. I think geological programs or astronomy programs, those things where you get different types of experiences that go beyond. So my favorite undergraduate course that I took as a student was U.S. History, U.S. History 2, which was 1865 to the present. Ironically, it was taught by a Brit, young guy. He still teaches there, and I was on campus. They're a client, and I was on campus, and I went to stop and visit and said hi, just to introduce myself. You taught me 20-something years ago, favorite course, and he would get up in the front of the room. This is when we had real chalkboards, not a whiteboard, real chalkboards, and it was there were 80 people in this class. The whiteboard the chalkboard went across the entire room, and he would get there. He would be waiting at the door for the class before it's to end, for a 15-minute window before his began, and he would fill the board with terms. It could be 40 to 50 terms or more on that board.
Yeah.
And over the course of an hour and 15, he'd cover them all. And he would walk back and forth, and just with such great animation. No textbook involved in that. Everything's there, and he presented it. I even think about, how could we replicate that? You can't do that online in this experience. You can't deliver it. But a virtual, you could see that. I mean, I can, because I've watched my daughter as she's had her goggles on. That was one of her Christmas gifts. And, and as action moves, you're turning your head. It's right. We're watching a TV of this, it's framed in here, but she's turning her head and seeing that. How could you replicate that experience? And I think you could bring a lot to it that way. So even in traditional liberal arts, humanities-based courses, you could bring that in. I think we talk about community. Imagine having an English course, a literature course, Shakespeare course, where you bring students together and they're reading Shakespeare together. And that 3D type of environment that you have, I think of those types of opportunities, which aren't necessarily traditional, but in an online, if I'm trying to do a reading of a play, that's very hard to do. You can't stage it. I can't necessarily even decide what order I want people to appear on my screen.
Yeah.
You can do much more of that. So I'm thinking of those types of things. We already talked about sciences a bit. Excuse me. But in those curricula, I'm definitely thinking of those things. I'll pause there, but that's definitely what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think, and that's what I was, somewhat alluding to with the comment about how it can be helpful for professors. I feel like there are a lot. My favorite professors were the ones that would walk around the class. They talk with their hands. They're very emotive. Like they're the ones. Yeah, it's partially because you just feel the passion is like coming out of them, and that's why they do it.
Yes,
but you don't feel that just seeing a head in a square for an hour and a half just talking, and they probably feel limited when they're talking. They're not as inspired because they're just kind of sitting there. Like they're not. I don't think many teachers became a teacher and are excited by the fact that they get to sit behind their computer and teach.
Yeah.
While that might be slightly easier, it's nowhere near as enjoyable or fun, I can't imagine. And so I think really, this would enable them to express that emotion and that passion, which I think is then what ignites students to have a similar, kind of position towards a particular course or program, even as a whole. Like that doesn't come through in a Zoom meeting. And I think being able to leverage that technology for, certain types of professors and courses in particular, it would be massive.
That would definitely be if I'm in their situation. I mean, I do a lot of conference presentations. And one of the things I will say when I'm walking into the room is like, please, please, please do not have me at a podium with a fixed microphone if it's a large room, because I am not a good standing behind the podium presenter. That's just not me. And it's really the same here. And this is, you like you said, it's this little box. And I used to do, before the pandemic, I had some webinars about how do you present online webinars. And one of the comments I would say is you should stand, because if you're giving a real presentation, you don't sit at a desk to talk to, you stand. If you want that energy to carry your stand. Now, 3 years after the pandemic here, I haven't stood for a presentation in a really long time. I've shifted and changed. But if I can move around, I get more passionate, probably, I'm sure, more animated. I don't know that you can be more animated than I am on this camera because I'm already moving already, but I get that way. And I think that carries over, because that is exactly why I got so much of that course.
Yeah.
That I wanted to go to that class, and I wanted to learn that material more than I had of any non-major related course.
Yeah.
And so that he very much impacted me that way. And I just think with virtual reality, you can embrace that more. You can get that energy across.
Yeah. And I think, one of the final kind of takeaways here, and we touched on a little bit earlier too, is a lot of the stuff that you're using for current students, for faculty, like we just talked about, can be repackaged and used for prospective students. You can show a prospective student, hey, go, virtually sit in on this classroom and watch this professor. Yes. And if they're one of those professors, they're doing VR because they're kind of, they're animated and they're all over the place. Students generally, I think, appreciate teachers like that, a bit more. They're more exciting. It makes the class less like I'm just sitting here taking notes. Mm-hmm. Those are the classes you want prospective students to see. And so getting them in that atmosphere is it's going to do wonders for your recruitment strategy as a whole, because they're going to feel part of your university before they're even, submitting their application, for example. And so I think being able to leverage, a lot of those things, repackage them, it's just kind of this cyclical nature of VR that I think people can and should get used to is how do we make these things and then augment these things, even your campus, your VR campus tours, of having people be able to hop around in an admissions meeting and go, okay, great. You love the, sports that we have here. Great. Let me show you a couple of the facilities in the, stadium, whatever. And you can bounce around in 15 seconds at 3 different things and not need to, walk across campus or through a city, or like you're saying, with all these different types of schools. Mm-hmm. And so I think being able to really think about, again, getting the bang for your buck with VR, because it is a new thing. There's going to be, testing and optimizations throughout the way, but, it's definitely something worth investing heavily into now, so that when that 5-year curve hits, you're not just starting out and then, falling behind it right away.
Yep. I totally agree. I think these are some good ideas. I would love to hear from anyone listening, watching, more about their experience, if they're doing it or what they're planning on. I'm really curious to see where this goes. I think there's just great opportunity here. And again, something that should be done more, especially from the academic side, in the next 5 years. So testing and experimenting now is a great time to do that.
Awesome. All righty. Well, thank you everybody for listening. This concludes another episode of Fanatical Fridays. We will hopefully see you again in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.